Welcome back to the Win with Dice podcast, a podcast featuring members of the Win with Dice team, and this week, once again, a special guest. I'm Calvin, and this week I'm joined by Ramon.
Hey guys.
And Kai, writer of Field Guide To Suldan.
Hey, how's it going?
Going good. Very excited to get talking about this. There's definitely some mech stuff I want to get into, and I want to introduce this whole setting you've written. As our listeners know, the past few weeks we've been talking to a whole bunch of Lancer content creators, so this is just a continuation of that, which is basically also partially helping me get a better sense of the system and trying to write myself a one-shot, so hopefully I'm able to absorb some knowledge from all these awesome people that we're talking to.
Sure, well, I hope I can give you some help in that regard too.
Yeah, you've written like a whole lot of awesome stuff in this field guide, so I'm really excited to talk about it, and hopefully people check it out.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Yeah, if you're new to the podcast, this is the Win with Dice podcast all about tabletop RPGs, running them, playing them. We like to take a casual approach to running tabletop RPGs and giving out that kind of advice. So, we want to show that the other side of the GM screen isn't so bad. And, if you haven't GM before, maybe it's time to pick it up because, if two jabronis from Canada can do it, you can do it too. So, yeah.
That's basically it. So, before we get into our main discussion for the show, we want to start off with one of the most important parts of the show, which is the Win with Dice weekly GM tip of the week.
Yes, the Win with Dice weekly GM tip of the week. I guess brought to you by me, although these things are getting kind of harder because doing like 60 of them in a row is tough. But especially when you're not playing too many games. But I wanted to touch base on, or I might have mentioned this before, that, when you're doing like a narrative scene or you guys are just, role playing. I think that because the games are usually set as like you're playing heroic characters or ace pilots in terms of Lancer. There's a level of skill that they just have that you as a person in the real world doesn't. So when you're playing the game as a GM, I don't think every action requires a roll. I think sometimes you can just intuit that this character, based on their background and their, like, say if they have relationship with an NPC in their background story, or like they were like a part of like a ship's crew, so like anything to do with the ship, you could probably just pull on their backstory and just assume that they're able to do it. I think that sometimes we lean too heavily into actually just rolling, like constantly rolling, and if you're rolling too much dice during those scenes, eventually like you might incur the bad luck god, right, and start rolling ones and stuff like that. So just only roll, my advice is to only roll when you think there's drama or tension. That's a good way to just kind of like, build it up where it's like, the outcome of this roll will actually matter versus like, you do it, but like, you mess up slightly. But, I think it's just to build the stakes. I think that's when you should roll. But that's the tip of the week.
Yeah, I think that's probably good information. Like, whether it's like a guaranteed success or guaranteed failure, like if there's something that you think a character is, like if it's something that reasonably they have at least a 5% chance of doing, like you're definitely not going to go in somewhere and just convince any random person of giving you everything they have, depending on what case it may be or what game system you're playing in. Like, if you, as the GM, know that the player is essentially wasting their time if they roll the die, then just kind of, deal with it as a narrative thing, because that's part of what these games are, the RP part of the RPG.
Yeah, definitely. And same thing where, it'll pull the player into the story more because you're looking at their backstory, their background, all the stuff that kind of makes up the character other than the numbers, and pulling that into the system, and I think it'll just be better for your game.
Yeah. So that's our weekly tip of the week, which is a long and confusing name, I know, but I will continue to use it. But let's get into talking about Suldan, and let's get into introducing our guest, Kai. I guess, like, what's your, history with, I guess, tabletop RPGs and Lancer in general? And for our guests, who are you?
My name is Kai Tave. I am I guess freelancer is probably the best way to put it. I'm a freelancer doing work for Massif Press on Lancer. I did developmental editing and encounter design for No Room For A Wallflower, which is Lancer's big narrative campaign module. And working with Miguel Lopez, I am co-designer on Lancer Battlegroup, which is a spin-off game of tactical naval combat that was commissioned by the Roll tabletop app. They wanted to fund games that will be appearing on their own marketplace at a point to be determined in the future. They haven't announced exactly when that is yet, but Battlegroup is currently in layout. It is fully playable. I put it together in about 9 months. It was kind of frightening.
Was it frightening, like, to you that you did it, or was it frightening because how awesome it is?
Okay, so how this happened is Roll approached Tom and Miguel, the creators of Lancer, and they're like, we're putting together this new tabletop app. You know, it's going to have voice chat, it's going to have this, and it's going to have that. But we're not sure if we're going to have, like, tactical map stuff. Could you make a version of Lancer that doesn't have that? Now, Lancer is a pretty tactically in-depth game. Like, I don't think you can take that component out of it and just make it a pure narrative-driven sort of thing. So they said, I don't think we can do that, but how about we make something else? And this wasn't a planned thing. You know, they hadn't set out to make this game. So Tom was kind of busy. He didn't have the time to handle the mechanical side of things, which is usually what he focuses on when it comes to Lancer's development. He does mechanics, and Miguel handles the lore and the narrative side.
Right.
So they approached me, and they're like, so we've got this project. Tom can't work on it. Would you like to be the co-developer for this? And I had just gotten done with Wallflower, which was very fun, and I was, excited to work on it. But that had been me coming in to work on a mostly finished project and kind of massage it into place and add some stuff to it. But the bulk of it was already done. This was me starting with a vague game-shaped object, like a rough skeleton draft. And they're like, would you like to make a game out of this? And I was absolutely terrified because I was like, yes, yeah, I'm not going to say no to that. Like, what do you do when an opportunity like that arrives in your lap? You're like, nah, you know what? I'm good. Pass it along to somebody else. No, you say yes.
Yeah.
But privately, I was having, like, a little panic attack because I had never made a full-on game before. And I was like, sorry, I should have asked, do you guys try to keep it family friendly here?
No.
Okay.
All the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my thought on the matter, because people really fell in love with the description of space combat in Lancer. There's a page in the back of the lore section where it goes into what it's like, and it's this very evocative thing that kind of sets this somber tone for what space combat is like. People were so excited to maybe one day see a space combat game in Lancer, and all I could think of was, if I fuck this up, I am never gonna live it down.
Right. Oh, the pressure.
So I got Miguel had been kind of tinkering off and on with ideas for a space combat spinoff for a little while. So he had something, like I said, I would describe it as a game-shaped object. It had stats, and it had some names, and it had some ideas for what rules might be like, but it wasn't really a thing you could play. And I took that, and I did 9 revision drafts over 9 months. Basically, every month for 9 months, I had a new version of this ready to go. I would put it out there for playtesting. People on the Lancer Discord server would beat it with sticks, and they'd say, hey, this completely broke the game. This completely messed everything up. This is awful. I played this, and it broke my computer. I was like, okay, fine, give it back. And I would take it and I would put together a new draft. And I did that for 9 months, and then I got a game out of it. And I have no idea how I managed to do that, and I'm not sure I'll ever be able to do it again. But I did it.
Wow.
Wow, just the realities of making a game.
Well, the realities of making a game like for someone, because there's a big difference in what I did with Battlegroup, where, you know, there's kind of a deadline. I thought there would be more of a deadline. It turned out there really wasn't. So I maybe could have relaxed a little bit more. But there's a difference between something like that and then something like the Field Guide to Suldan, which is a personal project that I've just been working on my own for close to 4 years now.
Yeah. In all honesty, Field Guide to Suldan was the first field guide I ever heard about. I think I heard about it like almost right after I knew what Lancer was. So I've been reading Suldan for a little bit now. So yeah.
Well, I started working on what would become Suldan around Lancer's 1.3 draft, and the first publicly available draft was 1.2. So right around then, I had found somebody had linked to Lancer, and I knew who Tom was from his webcomic Kill 6 Billion Demons, and I knew he liked messing around with RPGs. So I downloaded Lancer and I looked at it and was like, wow, this is really cool. I like where this is going. It's been a while since we've had a good mech RPG. I could tell it had some 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons influence, which is another game I'm a fan of. And I started sending him some, feedback emails, and 1.3 came out, and I was like, I want to try making something for this. And so I started working on this really, really early on in Lancer's development cycle. It didn't start out with the idea of I'm going to make a field guide, because nobody even knew what a field guide was at that point. But yeah, I've just been kind of tinkering with it off and on since then. There's been no deadlines. There's been no idea in mind of I have to have this much content done by this period. It's just kind of like a hobby car in the garage. You go out there and you mess with it when you feel like it, and you put it away when you don't.
So, I'm kind of curious then, what was the first part that you had started working on? Was it the setting itself? Was it the mech stuff, or?
The first part was the mech stuff. It was the manufacturer Chandrasekhar and Herschel, and I had the idea that I wanted to make a mech manufacturer. And in fact, the specific impetus for that was I wanted to make a mech with a chainsaw.
True. Skull got a null, right?
Yeah. Well, at the time in Lancer, the Blackbeard's chain axe didn't exist. It was a different weapon. So there were no chainsaw weapons in Lancer at that time. And I was like, I see a niche I can fill here. And it got me thinking, what sort of manufacturers? So Lancer has a variety of manufacturers. It has the 4 big ones, really. And Horus is kind of a weird oddball, but the others are very much, professional military outfits. They, sell weapons to these interstellar superpowers. Who would sell giant chainsaws? What kind of manufacturer would do that? Because chainsaws are kind of a weird weapon in general. They're very flashy and they're very, unreliable and unpredictable. That doesn't seem like the sort of thing that a military contractor would necessarily invest in. And so that made me think, well, what if it was somebody who didn't start as a military contractor? What if it was somebody who started out with another area of focus and another area of expertise? Who would do that? And that's what made me think, well, maybe it's something more theatrical, gladiatorial combat, arena fighting. something that's designed for spectacle and then got repurposed into something more military facing. And so that was the outline I set for myself for C&H. For that manufacturer, it was, this is going to be repurposed gladiator and sporting designs. And I sketched up some ideas. I write everything just in a notepad file. I just stick things down when they come to me. And I had some ideas of where I was going to take the mechs and kind of the broad picture of what I wanted them to do. And I started working on that. And I had 7 of them. The 8th, the Sagittarius, didn't get added until much later. But I had all 7 of the original mechs ready, kind of in short order. Like it all sort of fell together, and with them I had flavor text and lore kind of built into the stuff, because every piece of equipment in Lancer has like a little lore entry kind of explaining, you know, what it does, where it came from, how it works, and that sort of thing. And there was stuff in there that would eventually grow into the field guide that I had just left references to. Like the Matador mentions the Soldani Independence Front. At the time, I had no idea what their deal was. I came up with the name and I was like, yeah, that sounds right. and I put that in there, and you know, the description for the manufacturer sort of outlined how it had been established as a front company, basically for a revolutionary movement to manufacture and distribute weapons and vehicles for the rebels with plausible deniability. And it name dropped a few characters, but there was never a plan to start with of turning this into a fully fleshed out setting. But I laid the seeds there, which I then went back to and was like, yeah, okay, I think I can do some stuff with this. And then it just kind of grew and grew some more. And now it's up to about, I think, where are we at? 230 pages or something like that.
Well, the PDF I have says 253, so...
253, okay, yeah, there we go. Oh, that's right, because I did add a little more stuff. Not that one. Okay, yeah, 253 pages. That makes sense.
It is meaty and full of caloric glory. It's a lot. No, that's awesome. I like that you started small and things kind of grew organically out of these small ideas, right?
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really good way to approach things like this. I've never been a person who can sit down and just, I'm going to start at the very beginning and I'm going to work all the way to the end in a straight line. It doesn't work like that. I've never been able to do that. Did you guys ever do that thing in like middle school and high school where your English teacher taught you how to write an essay and they're like, the first paragraph is going to be about the topic and then the second paragraph is going to be about, did you ever have to do that?
Like essay writing stuff? Yeah, just explaining how to, and then you have your conclusion and how to structure your best paragraphs in what order and 5 paragraphs.
Yeah.
And all that.
Yeah, that shit sucks, doesn't it?
I mean, I didn't really pass English that well, so obviously.
Okay. Yeah, well, but I mean that's awful. That's a terrible way to write. Like, I'm sure it works for some people, but it doesn't work for me. So I just when I started fleshing the field guide out, I had already made the manufacturer, and for me that was kind of the big thing. I'm a very gameplay tactile sort of person. I like mechanics. I like things like that. And I do like setting too, but for me the important part was I had wanted to do this, I had wanted to achieve this goal of creating these new mechs that I thought were pretty cool, and it turns out other people kind of like them too. And then around that I was like, okay, now I can start fleshing this out. And I would kind of bounce from one thing to another thing to another thing. If I got hung up on a particular set of details, I would just set it aside and I would look at working on something else, and it just sort of fleshed itself out from there.
Yeah,
nice. I think that's just good advice for anything. Actually, yeah. because you know, you don't have to, you don't get running into that kind of that writer's block is always a tough thing to handle. So.
Yeah, and my advice as far as writing goes is just to do what works for you. Some people do work really well going straight from the top and working all the way through. And if that works for you, then do that. If that doesn't work for you, then find a way that does and do that instead. As long as something is being done, there's no wrong way to go about it.
Yeah, I'm thinking, like, I was wondering, like, I don't know if you've done, like extended, like, narrative stuff or prose stuff, but, like, I feel like this works really well when it comes to making something for an RPG or writing an RPG itself, because, I mean, like, it's not like the people who are using the book later are going to, you know, read everything in order necessarily. They might read, like, oh, I want to know about this character, I want to know about this aspect or this part of the setting. You know, if you're creating different parts of it, that's just, I mean, really, that's naturally how a setting might be built when you're actually, like, doing a homebrew setting when you're playing a game. You know, if you build something around your players, and then they're like, well, we want to go in this direction for a few miles, and then you have to figure out what's over there. And then once you do that, you have to make it a thing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's super important information, I think, for any RPG. And you guys seem to have an emphasis on, like, providing advice for GMs in particular. And that's really important information for anybody running a game. It's about the other players at the table. You know, they are going to be the focus of the action. They're going to be the focus of the narrative. So everything should sort of flow out from and back to those characters.
Yeah, like you have to, like, sometimes build around where they are and what they do. I think something we've said on the show before, or maybe a couple times, is that stuff isn't real until it hits the players.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which isn't to say that, like, you have to disregard everything you ever make until you actually say it out loud, but just that it doesn't have to be a solid thing that you stick to until the players see it. And even then,
exactly.
You can be flexible.
Yeah, it's a fairly common pitfall that I've seen over the years, where GMs get caught up in trying to flesh things out that are off screen, so to speak. They feel like they have to do that, or it's fake, or it's cheating or something. It's like, no, you can push that off to the side and come back to it when it becomes necessary to.
Yeah, I know I definitely do that, largely for my own satisfaction. I will definitely calculate things off screen that are completely unnecessary for the narrative.
And that's fine, because you're enjoying. See,
yeah,
that's
exactly.
the thing.
That's why.
As long as you are having fun doing it for yourself, that's fine. It's the idea that you have to do it, the obligation feeling of, oh, if I don't do this, I'm a bad GM. It's like, no, you're fucking not. You can skip that stuff. You can make things up. It's fine.
Yeah. You know, I always, for my jamming style, it's always been, you know, don't think about it too hard. Just make it up at the table, right? And then write it down later.
Yeah, exactly.
Because your players never know what you thought of beforehand and what you thought of in the moment. It's all real to them, right? You know, so, and I think that allowing yourself to just kind of be in the moment and feed off those players and feed off those characters, it'll bring the story more character driven, right? They're more integrated in the story. The story is more about them and, you know, their relationships versus like some weird ancient lore from like years ago, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's always been sort of a thing that I try to keep in the forefront of my mind when I'm writing something like the Field Guide to Suldan. It has NPCs, but I don't want those NPCs to overshadow everybody else at the table. You know, because it should be about the players and the GM, not, you know, reading somebody else's characters. So I try to keep the information on persons of interest, on places and things, kind of condensed to only what is the most relevant to the players, the most relevant to the GM. So they're useful, but it's not a thing that's going to try to steal the spotlight, so to speak.
Right. And speaking of those, like, I do want to sort of get into describing the setting itself, just for people who might not know about it yet, or might just be listening to this and be curious about it. because I think it's very interesting. It's sort of like in this transitional period after ousting this particular ruler, and then just trying to rebuild from there. And then Union might be helping, depending on the kind of campaign someone is running.
Yeah, so when I started to kind of flesh out the setting, there was something I noticed from some people who were picking up Lancer and looking at how to run games. And they were getting kind of hung up on the idea that Lancer has time dilation in it. If you're traveling a lot on spaceships, relativity does kick in. So people who are traveling very close to the speed of light are, from the perspective of everybody else, going to be aging much slower. So if you spend a lot of time zooming around the galaxy, there is this distinct feeling that the rest of the world is leaving you behind. And that's not a thing that you see a lot in things like Star Trek or Star Wars. It's just very much everything is on one straight timeline together. Now, this concept, it doesn't really matter for Lancer. Like, you could remove it from the game and it would be fine, but I think some GMs were feeling kind of overwhelmed by the idea of this setting that was just so big and so vast. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to zoom in. I wanted to make a setting where you could have an entire campaign, or just a one-shot, or part of a campaign, however much you wanted, but localized to this one little place at this one point in time. It isn't a conflict that's so big it's going to, shape the course of the universe to come. It's not anything like the conflict going on the Dawnline Shore or the Boundary Garden War with the Aun. But it's important to the people who do live there. Just because it's in this out-of-the-way planet doesn't mean that it isn't important to someone, and that's where the players can come in and they can make a difference.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I've definitely picking up Lancer for the first time and GMing it. I know exactly what you're talking about. Like, I did have that same kind of perspective where it's like, wow, this thing is so huge. Having planets on planets and people, and it's just like a lot to kind of wrap around your brain, and keeping all these things. I often found that I was like, what's the point? This is like, what's the point of this conflict? It's like a very, very minute thing in the grand scheme of all of Union space and beyond, right? So
right.
Trying to I really do like the idea of focusing down on one place, one time. People are still people there, and they are important, right? Those stories are important.
Exactly, because like you said, it might not matter to a superpower like Union in the long run, but it does matter to the people who are there on the ground. And I like the idea that this can give, perspective to the conflict and perspective to the fights. Like, you aren't just arriving and you have a couple of missions and then you leave. This is a place where you can get to know people, you can establish connections with the world itself, with the characters who live there, and the stories that come out of that.
Yeah. I'm curious, did working on Suldan influence anything that you did in Wallflower? Because it does have the same kind of vibe.
So Wallflower had been in development basically alongside Lancer since the start. That had always been kind of a concurrent developmental project. Miguel had written a lot of stuff about it. It did have some things that I sort of brought into it, though mostly Wallflower was already done in broad strokes. What I got called in to do was to sort of take this set of beats and evocative moments, and my big job was, okay, I have to turn this into an actual playable campaign. Because when I got the draft for the first time, people had been running it and it had been kind of working okay, but there wasn't a lot of guidance for here's what you do at the table. Mm-hmm. What do you do if your players go in this direction? What do you do if your players want to mess around with this little thing here? And so that was kind of the developmental editing that I did, sort of taking it and I guess gamifying it is maybe how you would describe it. Campaignifying it. You had to turn it into a thing that a GM could sit down and run a group of players through. And I brought some of what I had done with Suldan into that in terms of like focusing on specific characters. Like one of the notes I remember was, you know, there needs to be a character, there needs to be an NPC that players can interact with who operates the bar that they are basically using as an impromptu hotel. Players are going to want to talk to this guy. He is important. He has not even a whole lot of speaking parts in this, but players are still going to want to know about him. The engineer for the settlement, players are going to want to talk to that guy too. You know.
Yeah. Man, rest in peace.
Yeah. Can players get a drink here? Yes. The answer is always yes. My rule of thumb for adventures is you want at least 3 things to point players to. You want places where they can go and get food, places where they can go and get alcohol, and places where they can go and have a fight. If you cover those 3 bases, that's usually the stuff that players will want to do when they have downtime. And if you can give them some examples and, you know, a few little things for that, then you've got it made right there.
Yeah, that's pretty solid actually.
There's one example in particular that I can think of where I was like, okay, this is obviously a thing that needs to have some coverage. There's and this isn't a major spoiler for Wallflower, I'll try to avoid those, but there's a point kind of early on in the adventure where the players encounter a computer that has been overtaken by a virus, and it's causing machines to go haywire and malfunction. And in the original draft, the players would discover this computer and, you know, you would tell them, here's what you find on it. And that was it. Now, if you've run games for players, you know as well as I do that if you give them something like that, they're going to want to poke around at it. They're going to want to download the virus. They're going to want to try and see if they can fix the virus. They're going to want to see if they can turn the virus into a weapon. They're going to do all sorts of extremely unwise things with this.
It is.
So I wrote up some
accurate.
Yeah, and that was basically one of the jobs that I did on Wallflower. Was I tried to find those moments where I knew there was going to be an issue with, you know, a poor unprepared GM who was going to have to improvise. Oh shit, what happens now? And I was like, I wrote some notes down. I'm like, okay, this should be like a little downtime thing. If people want to poke around with it, here's a brief outline of what that could look like. Here's some effects if the players do something stupid and get their own stuff infected with this virus. Here's what this should do. Here's what this shouldn't do. You know, don't have this deprotagonize anybody. It's not going to break their mech. It's not going to remove them from play. But it should still do something. And you can't do that for everything. You can't cover all the eventualities, but you start to see patterns and you start to notice, okay, players are absolutely going to poke around in this thing. There should be something here so the GM doesn't have to just pull something out of the seat of their pants.
Yeah. You are literally describing exactly what happened for my Wallflower group immediately.
well, you're very welcome. You're welcome. I'm glad that could help you. And there's other stuff I did along those lines that I don't want to get into here because it could be spoilers, and I don't want to. I don't want to ruin the surprises for anybody who hasn't played it yet. It's a really good adventure. Everybody seems to love it.
Yeah. Wallflower is really good. If you haven't picked it up or read it or anything, just grab some friends, grab Wallflower, and just go have some fun. Because honestly, like that was my gaming background is a lot of Pathfinder, and you know, they do put out really good adventure paths, and like Wallflower was really good. So, you know, like I felt like when it was over, I was like, damn, I can't believe it's over. Like, oh, it was such a good campaign.
And I'm extremely flattered that I was asked to do some work on it. Like I said, it was mostly like the bulk of the work had already been done by Tom and Miguel. I got called in to sort of just kind of massage things into place. And I did design a lot of the encounters for it. So the fights were things where I went through and I was like, okay, what would work good here? Which NPCs would be a good combination? And then I added some other little things here and there, but it's still just being asked to work on that, which I knew was a huge labor of love from both of them, was immensely gratifying. I was super pleased to be able to contribute to that, even in a smaller capacity.
I mean, still had a big impact, obviously.
Sometimes it's the little details that bring a thing together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something I was thinking of when I was looking at all these, all the aspects of Suldan here. Even down to all the downtime stuff, the local goods and things like that.
Yes.
Just something that you might not be aware of immediately as a GM, but that when you have it, then you have it. If the players are going to look for something, it's better to have that information, I think.
Yes.
Although I do sometimes over-prep myself, so.
Well, and that comes back to what I mentioned earlier about wanting to have just enough information that the GM can, work with it, but you don't want to necessarily go overboard and drown them in information that won't be useful. I've been playing RPGs since around the mid-1990s, and it was for a while, and sometimes still is, very common for RPG writers to kind of go overboard when it comes to things like setting details. They want to fully flesh out the cosmology of this world and describe its ecosystem and its calendar and all this other stuff. And I don't want
describing me perfectly there.
See, I don't want to say oh, this is bad and you should never do it, but a lot of the time that information is so overwhelming and it just goes underused.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to try to focus it down onto things that are of immediate relevance. There's a game called The Day After Ragnarok. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. It's written by Ken Hite. It's kind of an alt history post-World War II thing. And something he does in that game that I really liked and that I took to heart is that periodically as you go through it, there'll just be a sidebar and it's 5 castles in the United States where you could have a fight scene. And it's it. It's just this little sidebar that's stuck over here, and it's just these quick bits of something you can grab and turn into a plot hook, turn into an adventure. It seems like such a niche, narrow thing to have a sidebar on. But for the sorts of games you're going to be doing with that, it's actually extremely relevant. It's a lot more relevant than a couple pages on the economic system of post-apocalypse America.
Yeah, it's that little bit of inspiration, right? While you're just kind of skimming through the book, you read a sidebar and you're like, "Oh, that's a good idea."
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Even just the thought of, "Oh, right, there are castles in the United States," is enough to get the wheels turning.
Yeah, man, I could totally just envision it. You said it, and I was like, "Oh, yes."
Exactly. Yeah, and that's the sort of thing I want to do with my writing. I want to give people that spark without drowning them in too much information or making it feel like I'm trying to tell my story instead of giving them the tools to tell theirs.
Yeah, for sure. I was wondering if there was any cultural or what's the background of where Suldan is, because it feels very, I don't want to say not North American, I should say.
It's definitely something that I wanted to kind of play around with. The inspirations for Suldan include the game Heavy Gear and its own inspirational source, Armored Trooper Botoms. There's some Brigador in there, Folko Runka's series of counterintelligence games, things like Cuba Libre. And then in terms of real-world culture, something, I don't want to make it seem like I'm... how do I put this? I don't want everything to be sort of homogenous and bland. I figured the future is definitely a melting pot, and so I looked at different inspirations and different sources, but I didn't want to just be like, I'm going to file the serial numbers off of this culture and stick it in there. That seems a little questionable. So there's some of that in there, but I've tried to keep it, not just sort of like, it's this nation, but with a coat of paint, so to speak. But I wanted it to feel like, this is the far future. This is a world where humanity came back from near extinction and then went and colonized the stars. You're probably going to see a lot of cultural fusion and a lot of crossover influences that color all these sorts of things, and not just be like, it's it's like Stargate SG-1, where every planet you meet is the forests of Vancouver.
True. That those budget constraints, it's tough.
Yeah, I mean, you work with what you have, but when you're writing, you can do whatever you want to.
Yeah, for sure. Okay.
So, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Calvin. No, go ahead, Calvin.
Okay, no, I was just saying, like, I think we've talked a lot about the setting. I don't know if we've described, like, exactly what the situation is there. I don't want to, like, spoil too much about it, because there is some really interesting stuff going on with these characters. Miranda, especially, I thought was a very interesting character. But yeah, I if we wanted to say, like, what exactly Suldan is, or the situation that's ongoing that the players might come into, and then maybe we can go into some of the, like, the mech stuff that I really want to talk about.
So the Field Guide to Suldan takes place on the titular planet, which is a sort of remote world out in the further reaches of Union space. And it was colonized about 250 years ago. It's been slowly growing ever since. But sometime around 50 years ago, the Union administrator of the planet decided that she could get things going way easier and way faster on the road to, Union's high standard of living for everybody if she just took a few shortcuts and maybe engineered a coup here and there. Like, this is stuff you're not supposed to do. Like, you are absolutely not supposed to do this, but she has more of an ends justifies the means mindset. And so the plans for the world's development went off track because she basically put a puppet dictator into power, thinking that she could control the situation, and she very much couldn't. So over the last 50 years, Suldan has seen a widening in the wealth gap. It's seen increasing tyranny and brutality and oppression. And the thing about Union is space is very big, and Union can't be everywhere at once. So this sort of fell through the cracks until not that long before the narrative present, when a rebellion finally kicked off and ousted and deposed the Emir, who was ruling the planet at this time with an iron fist. They used the manufacturer Chandrasekhar and Herschel as a cover, as a means to manufacture weapons and armaments and mechs for the rebel movement under the guise of producing things for the gladiator games, which are a big pastime on Suldan. So they amassed all these armaments in secret, they kicked off the rebellion, and it worked. But now the remnants of the Emir's forces are conducting terrorist attacks. They're hiding out somewhere in the arid badlands of the planet where they haven't been found yet. There's a defense grid covering the planet that's malfunctioning, and nobody can shut it off. And so there's this very tense situation where it's a protracted asymmetric conflict that can't be solved by just going, here is a clearly identified bad guy in this clearly identified bad guy place, go kill him, and that makes everything better.
Right. Yeah, that's something that like a lot of stories may fall into. Like they try to make it a very simple ending, especially like narratives like outside of, I don't know, like outside of RPGs and stuff. But like in an RPG, like you have the opportunity as a player to connect with those changes and the consequences of those actions.
Right. And I wanted a Suldani campaign to be kind of sandboxy in terms of how you approach it. There are a couple of ways you could get into the game. You could be people from Suldan who are trying to, win against this tyrannical regime in exile. You could be pilots from Union who have finally arrived after they figured out what was going on, and they're like, "Oh shit, we need to do something about this. This has gone very wrong." Or you could be mercenaries brought in to do a job for a paycheck, and as you get involved with that, the situation gets way more complicated than you originally thought it was going to. Mm-hmm. And I try to provide some information for several approaches to that to explain, how different NPCs might react to you if you are a Union pilot versus if you are a mercenary pilot, or if you are a local Suldani themselves who is being involved in this conflict.
Yeah, I like those. Like they just give like a springboard for GMs to work off of.
Yeah. It's also a good. I think it's great for you to have that like session 0 kind of download your players into what you want to run, being like, what do you guys think, right? Like, where do you guys want to be from, right? Like, what how are you entering the scene, right? That's I like that.
Yeah, and it can also kind of dramatically change how a setting and a campaign plays out depending on where the players come from. If you're Union, if you're a mercenary, if you're a local, that's going to color how things play out, even if you go through roughly the same sorts of beats and the same sorts of plot hooks.
Yeah, or even if your group is like a mix of...
Yeah, you can absolutely do that too. That's a time-honored tradition. You have some people come in from off-world, you have some people who've been living there for a while, you have all the different perspectives and the internal conflicts that can arise from it. Because something about Suldan is, right now, they're extremely mistrustful of Union. They feel that Union basically put them in this terrible situation and then left them out to dry. Now, on the one hand, the administrator, Miranda Cortez, was kind of doing her own thing that she really should not have been, and covering her tracks up with misinformation. So, yeah, it's not really how things are supposed to go, but on the other hand, it's still Union's responsibility. They let this happen, and they showed up late to the party. And so you aren't necessarily being hailed as heroes when you arrive. You have to gain the trust of people while you're trying to set things right.
Yeah, I think that can lead to some like really great character moments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because Union is presented as this kind of idealistic sort of semi-federation. They're an interstellar polity that has pulled themselves out of their own, fascist government, and they kicked off a revolution against them in the past. And they're trying to rebuild, and they're trying to do things right now. And then this world that just slipped through the cracks, not even out of malice, but just because space is really big and it's hard to juggle this kind of interstellar empire or interstellar polity, or however you want to look at it. And now you show up and it's like, oh yeah, they don't necessarily trust you. Just being Union does not automatically mean you are the good guys in everybody's eyes, even if you really want to do the right thing. You have to prove that with your actions.
Yeah. It's very funny because I often play Union characters, because my general sentiment as a player is always like, no, I'm here to do the right thing, usually. Like, I'm always just like, I want to help. So to me, it's like playing a Union recruit is the best way for me to naturally do that, right?
Yeah.
You show up, you signed up because, you know, you want to go get the baddies, but you show up and it's way more complicated than you think, kid. Right? So
yeah. And I wanted to have that sense of like, you know, these people, they've had their own problems for a while. You are stepping into the middle of a situation that has its own history. Like you were talking about earlier, you know, the stuff that's off screen. Like there is some of that that's gone on there that colors how you approach a campaign in this setting. And I wanted to create just enough context to say, okay, here's what this is like. And then when the players step into it, suddenly they are thrust into the middle of this conflict that's already been going on, that has its own history, that has its own, you know, players and its persons of interest and its moments in history, and you have to kind of navigate your way through that now that you are in the spotlight.
yeah, for sure. All right. Let's move on to some of these mechs because
Sure.
I think they're crazy good.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, Calvin and I have a couple of favorites around here.
Yeah, I really do. I do also want to shout out the artwork, which is, you know, again, part of what gets people really into a book is going to be the artwork. Because I saw the comment that was like, as I was going through these, my favorite kept changing because it was the comet, and then it was the charioteer. And then I saw Sagittarius, and I was like, "Oh, this is my exact aesthetic."
Well, I have to give credit here to Connor Dodd. Also goes by Magnus the Mage on Twitter and Discord. Connor has been a longtime friend and art buddy. He asked me when the field guide was still just like some mechs and a couple of notes. He was like, "Hey, can I do some sketches based on your stuff? I want to get some practice in." And I said, "Yeah, sure." You know, I figured it was going to be some quick and simple things. And then he hits me with like a couple of colored full illustrations. And I was like, oh, okay. So we're actually doing this. And he has illustrated all of the mechs for the field guide. I've been watching him improve. He's been going to school to study art, and he has done me an incredible service with these illustrations. I was so glad that I was able to like formally commission him to be a part of this. And he actually just finished up another non-mech piece. He did an illustration of the Emir in exile.
Oh.
And it's this absolutely gorgeous piece. Like, I am just incredibly pleased to have had him be a part of this project, as well as plenty of other artists too. Like, I don't want to leave them out of this, but if we're talking about the mech specifically, then Connor is a huge part of, I think, what makes them really pop for people. So I have to give him credit there. I have to give my boy a shout out.
Yeah, we'll have a link to his socials below. Magnus the Mage.
Yeah,
we'll have a link to his Twitter below.
Okay, perfect. You know, like I said, I cannot thank him enough for the work that he has done in realizing these.
Yeah, I think like again, that's what helps get people into a book, into a setting. Like, you can describe things, but when it comes to stuff like you can describe settings and things like that, but when it comes to stuff like the mechs, like, you want to get that visual feedback of like, what exactly is this thing supposed to look like, especially like the more weird ones.
The weird ones, you're talking about the Ifrit problem.
Probably, yes.
That's actually
100%.
that's actually his favorite mech to play as well. He is involved in an ongoing Lancer campaign. He has been a huge Ifrit proponent, and in fact, a lot of the adjustments to the Ifrit have come out of games in which he's done some incredible Galaxy Brain level stuff, and I'm like, okay, I gotta go back and I gotta change this.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the mechanical stuff, because the Ifrit has
Sure.
a really really interesting mechanic that I don't think I've seen in another game before. The Unbounded.
Yeah, that was actually the thing. So when I design mechanically, I don't have a consistent approach to it. Sometimes I approach design from a narrative perspective first. Sometimes I approach it from a mechanical perspective first, and then I go towards whichever direction I didn't cover to start with. Like if I start with mechanics, then I'll think about, okay, what am I going to drape over this to kind of make it cohesive? If I start with a narrative, I ask myself, how am I going to mechanically realize the fantasy of this? With the Ifrit, it was literally I came up with the idea for the unbounded trait, and then everything else just fell into place. And unbounded is once per round, whenever the Ifrit moves off the edge of the battlefield map, it may wrap around to the opposite side as if they were connected. Other characters cannot follow or be carried by you during this movement, and you must end any such movement fully on one side of the map. So the Ifrit can treat any battle map like it's asteroids. You can just loop from the bottom to the top of the map. Or you can, left to right, you can go at weird angles and you pop back out somewhere. It's my favorite kind of ability, first of all, because A, it's not a thing you expect to see.
Right.
And B,
it's so cool.
it has just enough power to get you into trouble, but not enough power to get you out of it. Because it's only once per round. So you can loop around, but you can't loop around, shoot, and then go back the way you came in one move. You have to fully commit. If you're going to jump all the way across the map, you better have a really good plan.
Yeah, you better know where you're putting yourself. I love the idea of just totally Pac-Manning the battlefield. Because again, it's such a unique idea. It's something that obviously other games, other even Mechs and Lancer, they'll play with different sort of placement things and movement things. But this just feels so leaning on the fourth wall as a power.
Yeah, a little bit. I had that thought. I was like, this is kind of meta, but at the same time, I think it's an acceptable level of meta. It's not grabbing you and going, hey, look, I'm breaking the fourth wall. You could kind of see this working in character, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the whole imagery of, this thing is not really bound to reality, right? It's already been a thing across all the Horus Mech designs where it's these things just kind of break rules, right?
Right. The Minotaur with its infinite space cockpit,
Right. You're just safe because there's infinite amount of space between you and whatever's on the outside, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Things like that. No, for sure. I think it's killer. And immediately when I saw that, I was like, oh boy, you could do a lot with a very simple trick.
I have heard a lot of people, they'll message me and they'll tell me stories about the stuff that they got up to in their games using the mechanical stuff that I built for this field guide. It always feels really good, because it's they got to experience this really cool moment, and I sort of helped make that. They did all the hard work, but I gave them the tools to do that. And there's something that feels really good about that.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely am a player who lives for those galaxy brain moments where you push up your glasses and you be like,
yeah, exactly. Players love stuff like that. They absolutely love a chance to bust out some really crazy shit from this one obscure little ability or this one really weird ability, and I love being able to facilitate that.
Yeah, for sure.
You guys said you had some favorites. Which if free to side, let's set that guy aside. He gets enough time in the spotlight as it is. What are some of your favorites?
For me, the Sagittarius, definitely. Just because I'm super into Hawkeye and Green Arrow, and I love trick arrows as a concept. I've actually been over on a different channel. I've been part of their streamed superhero RPG game, and I've been playing a superhero who is essentially that. I have, what is it now, 18, 17 different kinds of trick arrows that I kept making over time because I had all sorts of different ideas. So when I saw this, I was just instantly like this is the exact kind of thing that I would be super into, and just having different kinds of arrowheads. it basically just like trick arrows. Like I would love to use that and all the, like the holographic stuff as well.
Yeah. Everybody loves trick arrows on a bow. Like if you're gonna make a bow do anything, you got to have something like that.
Yeah.
and I liked the idea of a mech with a bow, because it's like, it seems counterintuitive. Like, why would you do that? But then you start to think about, okay, well, how would you make a silent mech weapon though? These are like huge guns. Like, your average assault rifle for a mech is not just a thing you're going to put a sound suppressor on. So it almost loops back around into being a sensible idea. Well, okay, if you can't silence this autocannon, what if you tried a weapon that didn't have any sound at all?
Like a bow, even though
exactly.
It's a big one.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you gotta stretch your belief a little bit, but it sounds plausible, and that's really what matters here.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's very plausible in the Lancer setting for sure.
Right,
because special materials, nano machines are in everything. Like
yeah. You throw enough words at it, and it makes sense.
Yes, the science, the technobabble, right? There was
yes.
technobabble added, and it's just like, yeah, problem solved, right?
Yeah, Lancer has a particular kind of technobabble that I love, even though I probably shouldn't, which is this kind of dry military industrial ad copy. It's like something you see in presentations by Raytheon. I love that stuff. It's awful. I hate that its purpose is to sanitize and corporatize the act of describing horrible things, but I love the cadence of it. It sounds good. It's like when Ash in Alien talks about admiring the xenomorph for its purity. It's like, that's the feeling of it.
Yeah. I like that the book it's treating you like you're actually purchasing this machine.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you open up a catalog and you're literally just reading about it. It's cool.
There's an old system that got deprecated from the game. It used to be a Manticore system called Haywire M, and it's got one of my favorite little bits of like lore and fluff that Miguel ever wrote for it. Is Haywire ammunition carries a codex slurry payload within its core that, upon impact, pulses blanket viral code out to systems in close proximity. The effect is lost on soft targets, as Haywire codex slurry ammunition is only chambered in 30mm and up.
Like, it just sounds like a codex entry from like Mass Effect or something. It's so good.
It's great too, because the implication, the effect is lost on soft targets because it's only chambered in 30mm and up. It's such a dry, dispassionate way of saying, if you shoot this at a person, they just turn into mist.
Yeah.
That's what it's saying right there. It's like, this doesn't work on people, dumbass, because it kills them horribly.
There's no secondary effects to it. It's gone.
Yeah, it's like, congratulations, dude, you wasted that bullet.
There's something about, describing something so horrific so technically to make it seem cool.
Yeah, it's really cool, except for the fact that, it actually exists. And that part is bad. It's like guns are the coolest thing ever, except that they're real. That part's not cool.
That is true. If guns were fake, it would be way better.
Yeah, exactly. Like, guns kick ass. The fact that they exist doesn't. But they're still pretty cool as long as they're fake.
Yeah, as long as it's fictional, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we got to vote for the Sagittarius here.
Well, I am torn because I really like the saber.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like the Callista.
The Callista, yeah. The Callista is fun because its concept is very basic and simple. I wanted to make a mech whose whole thing was just, it's tough as hell. There are tough mechs in Lancer, but they usually tend to be more like a kind of zone control, something like the Tortuga, where the idea is you have a bulwark that forms a perimeter and a firing zone. And I just wanted something that walked up to you and hit you as hard as it could. A lot of the melee mechs in Lancer tend to be lighter, more nimble, faster things like the Nelson or the Morning Cloak. And I was like, I want to turn that on its head. I want to make a mech that's super slow and super chunky, and it doesn't have any like teleportation or movement tricks. In fact, it sucks at moving. When it boosts, it can only move in a straight line, which doesn't seem like it should be that big of a deal, but it turns out it's actually kind of a pretty big deal if you want to get close to somebody. But when it gets up close to you, it ends your life. It's just it's the most brick stupid, no frills, chunky mech, and all it does is walk up to you and hit you hard. But that was something that I noticed that the game didn't have, quite in its roster. I always try to identify what does the game not support currently? Like, is there a niche that isn't being filled? And I want to try to work in those areas rather than just doing something that's already been done but slightly different.
I mean, yeah, I'm a big fan of just apply melee to face and then win, right? So,
well, like I said, the chainswords were where I first started really working on this, and so that was the Callista. This was one of the first mechs that I worked on for this.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool. I mean, I'm a Warhammer 40K player, so anytime there's chain swords or chain axes or anything that's like, get those skulls for the skull throne, like I'm like, oh yes, give it to me.
And the Callista has some interesting weapon mechanics that appeal to certain kinds of players, which is that they have a lot of sort of variance and randomness to them. The chainsword in particular, its damage scales when you roll sixes on the dice. If you roll a 6, it has like little exploding dice to it. And that's a mechanic you don't see a lot in Lancer. Things tend to be a little more reliable and predictable. And I do like that to a degree. I'm a big fan of games like Into the Breach. I don't know if you've played that. It's a computer game. It's a tactics game where every enemy's movement in advance, and how much damage everything does precisely. So there's no randomness. There's no 90% hit chance that turns into a miss. And I really love games like that, but I also know that there are players out there who really love swinging for the fences and getting a massive exploding dice jackpot of super huge damage. And so, since Lancer already has a lot of really reliable stuff, I wanted to add some things that were maybe a little less reliable and a little more random to give those players something that they could really enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's nuts that you also gave this thing overkill. I was like, what? No, that's exactly the point. If you roll a 6, then you get more damage. If you roll a 1, you take heat and then re-roll the dice so you can try to roll a 6 again. It's so glorious.
and sometimes you'll roll overkill like 5 or 6 times on it. And that's okay, because reactor stress is a resource. If you're ending a mission and you're not basically on your last legs, then you weren't trying hard enough.
Yeah, did you even have fun? I don't think so. Did you pop their core? So many players always like pop their core power, so worry about being exposed, all this nonsense. I was like, listen, if the people are dead, they can't hurt you anymore.
Is that what's going to what's time?
Yes. Hey, there you go, folks. That's your super secret second tip of the week. If your enemies are dead, they can't hurt you anymore.
And I actually went and doubled down on that for the IPSN Warden, who has a core power where you can just straight up spend reactor stress to attack more. I was like, all right, if you want to do this, you're just gonna have to bite the bullet here.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it because it's like, I think there's the cool part about like Lancer and mech combat is that like the mech embodies you, but it isn't you, right? So you don't feel like you're taking bodily harm. So
exactly.
You can push your machine
exactly.
further.
You can lose weapons. You can lose limbs. You can get the shit beat out of you over and over and over again, and then you go back to base and you print a new one, and it's fine. I really like that about Lancer, actually. It's a departure from things like BattleTech, where mechs are these treasured heirlooms that are handed down, and everybody's forgotten how to make the good stuff, and you have to salvage parts from the battlefield, and it's like, nope, you can just drive this one like you stole it. Yeah, you're done. You throw it in the recycler, get a new one. Fuck it, whatever.
Yeah, just blow it up. You know what to do, right?
Exactly. You can self-destruct every single mission if you want to, and there's no penalty for it.
Yeah, I mean, the game is about being in a mech, so
right, exactly.
Remove the barrier there.
Exactly, and I think that's a very good point that you make about mechs is they give you the satisfaction of a personal combat, so to speak, but you also have that crunch of being a vehicle where you can take these big brutal impacts and it doesn't matter quite as much.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if you want to add anything, Calvin?
I did want to talk about Duels a bit, although I'm looking at our time and I'm realizing that I feel like there's more we can talk about, but we...
Yeah, I'm sorry. I probably have dragged things on for you.
Oh, no problem at all. That's honestly been like one of my favorite things about like talking to so many different people is just hearing someone get passionate about something. I love hearing that. I love sharing that because it's just great.
Well, go ahead and ask whatever you want to. Just you guys can tell me when you're out of time. Like, hit me with whatever.
Do we want to just cover like the concept of duels very quickly or very briefly? Because I feel like they're another very interesting idea.
Yeah. So I have a system in Suldan for 1-versus-1 duels. And the reason I wanted to look at that is because I don't think tactical combat games work really well 1v1. I think you lose a lot without the teamwork component, where you have an ally who pulls somebody out of cover so somebody else can shoot at them. Somebody else hacks this guy so something happens. And with just 1v1, what happens more often than not is it's just two people kind of trading dice rolls back and forth at each other. So I wanted to have a thing for duels because arena combat is such a big part of Suldani culture. It's one of their big pastimes. It's a thing that goes back to their history. And so I wanted to make something that would let GMs and players have that, but without having to, try to awkwardly shoehorn it into a tactical battle map context. So the duel rules were inspired by a game called Strike. Jim McGarva worked on it on his own. It's a sort of tactical combat game based very heavily on 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons, but it also had some interesting challenge rules for different things like chase scenes. And the idea with duels is you and your opponent are sizing each other up and you're choosing maneuvers and approaches in secret. It's a bit like rock, paper, scissors, but with some variance, because there are dice rolls that get involved too. But you choose an approach in secret and reveal them at the same time, and that will kind of influence how the roll turns out. If you choose a guarded advance and they choose a headlong charge, then that's going to alter how things play out between you two for that round of the duel.
Right.
And then it goes into, okay, you can gain the initiative and the upper hand over them, and you are now on the offense and they are on the defense. They're looking to try and flip things back to a neutral position or maybe take the offense themselves, while you're trying to bring things to a conclusion as quickly as possible by slipping past their guard. I've had some people play around with it. It seems to work pretty well, which I'm pleased with. I haven't had too many extensive play tests of it, but I'm pleased with where it is at the moment. I think it's an interesting addition to sort of not quite narrative, not quite tactical. It's somewhere in between.
Yeah, and that's perfect for like just like a game like this, because it's really easy to, I mean, at least from the sessions I've played, it's really fun to have like a rival in the game.
Yes.
Like it's just someone who you see across the battlefield, and you see
Exactly.
their mech, and you know them, you point them out, like you want to fight them directly. It's great to have like a mechanic for that.
Exactly, and in a Suldan campaign specifically, there are a lot of opportunities for that to happen. You could get involved in the arena combat. You could end up having rivals there, or you could have rivals on the battlefield. That's a thing that can happen because the Emir's forces have, you know, this motley crew of soldiers and mercenaries and his own personal elite guard, and so there are all these opportunities for this to come up, not just in a downtime context, but in an actual mission where you might be cut off from the other players, you might be isolated, you might have a chance to fight your nemesis on 1 versus 1. So I wanted to create a thing that let that happen with a little mechanical weight than just a single dice roll.
Yeah. Because like your nemesis doesn't necessarily, like one of the things that I also like about Lancer, among the millions of things, is that the people you're fighting, you don't necessarily have to fight them to the death. And I don't know, there's part of me as a player that likes leaving enemies alive sometimes, because, you know, I like having additional plot threads going on, and maybe something will bite me in the ass at some point, but it'll be a consequence of my actions.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that I actually borrow from 4th edition D&D. They had a rule in there, which is that if you are the person who reduces an enemy to 0 HP, you get to decide what that means. It's not instant death. You can say kill, but you can just as easily say you didn't kill. And I like to kind of bring that into games just on my own, because I think that's a good empowering rule on the player end to give them that sort of control, because maybe somebody doesn't want to play a bloodthirsty character, but they don't want to hamstring themselves with like awkward, cumbersome rules for pulling their punches or trying to only hit, you know, somebody in the arm or whatever. It's like, no, you can just play the game. You don't have to penalize yourself, but you get to decide what that means.
Yeah, you don't have to deal with like, here's the rules for non-lethal damage, and then
right.
If it ends up being less effective, then you might not get to do the non-lethal knockout, and then someone else comes along and is like, well, my character wants to kill them, so here we go.
Right. Now, ironically, I actually do not do that in Battle, because in Battlegroup, naval combat is very explicitly supposed to be extremely super deadly and dangerous for all parties involved. So there are special rules for pulling your punches there, just because I don't want to make it easy for you to do that.
Yeah.
But that's a special
totally
case.
Understandable.
And that's a special case. And when you identify, okay, why am I doing this? Why am I putting rules for, you know, pulling my punches into this game? Is there a purpose for it? If the answer is yes, then great, go for it. If there isn't, then, you know, why bother? Just let people do what they want.
Yeah. I also wanted to talk about specialty licenses, but I feel like I think we might have to have you back on again.
Sure.
Go into these details.
I don't want to monopolize your time, but I would be happy to come back on and talk about this. I do like to talk about my own work. I am an egotist, you know. I'm very happy to do that. I would love to talk with you guys about Battlegroups if you are interested.
Yeah, of course.
For sure.
I'm so like I read a little bit of Battlegroup, I think, when the 4th playtest was out. So
yes,
I'm excited to see what it is now. And,
significantly better than it was during the 4th playtest. I can promise you that. Oh my god, that game went through so many revisions and updates, and it used to be so janky. The last time you looked at that was like the 4th playtest. You're in for a treat now, because it's actually playable, and it doesn't completely fall apart.
All right, cool. So yeah, let's if you want to come back on and it works out, yeah, let's talk
Yeah,
about
you know,
Battlegroup. Let's talk about,
like I said,
stuff
I
that we
don't
haven't-
want to, monopolize your time too much. I know you guys have other stuff and other people to talk to, but anytime you want to have me back on to talk more about this or Battlegroup or just about anything, I'd be happy to do that. This has been very enjoyable. Appreciate it.
I mean, we can spend our time with talking with whomever and whatever, and we just, I mean, like everyone we've talked to, we want to have another conversation with. So I think we might have to have like a part 3 of Lancer Month.
Okay.
At this point,
I'm down for that if you guys are.
for sure. But we are gonna, just looking at the time again, we are gonna have to wrap up this episode here. It's gonna be another long one compared to everything else. But it was really fun to have you on, Kai. I really enjoyed talking about Field Guide and, just in general writing stuff. I think there's some interesting insights that people might, be able to take away from this.
Well, I hope so, and thank you for having me on. Like I said, this has been very enjoyable, and I appreciate the opportunity. I don't do a lot of podcasts. This is actually my first. So.
Oh, well, we're glad to have you on for your first podcast then.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Before we head off, we do want to give some shout outs to people, especially the people we've talked to already. We'll have a link to Vex's Tumblr. We talked to Vex last week about In Golden Flame. I'll have a link to their Tumblr below. We will have another link to the Field Guide Liminal Space, but I believe by the time this is out, the Kickstarter will be over. But if you still want to check it out and the playtest stuff...
Yeah, it's on its last 30 hours right now as we speak.
So for sure by the time this is out, the Kickstarter will have been over, but you can still go ahead and check it out and see what you missed if you didn't support it. As well, another shout out to Shaka's Field Guide to Infokane, which we've mentioned a bunch of times on here. You can go to the itch.io page and pick up the LCP file and the PDF, and Celeste's Lancer RPG NPC guides, which give you a guide on how to use different NPC types and what sort of synchronization you can get out of them. And lastly, I want to make sure that I mention the Untold Stories project. That's where I'm at every Monday, playing Mutants and Masterminds in their superhero campaign, based on the Nether War campaign published by Green Ronin. We're getting into the last few episodes of that. The previous episode was, at time of recording, the previous episode was very emotional. By the time this comes out, we'll have one episode left, and I do not know if I'm going to cry on stream. I cannot guarantee that I won't, frankly. But definitely go check them out and support that channel. They've got some new stuff coming in March that's going to be really exciting to get to. And that's about it. I don't know, Ramon, do you have anything else you want to add before we head off?
Oh man, hit him with the good stuff.
All right, well, everybody out there who's listening, thanks again for hanging out with us, and remember to keep on winning with dice, and we'll see you next week.
All right, see you guys.